Today I'm speaking with Jake Broe, a United States Air Force veteran who served 6 years as a nuclear and missile operations officer. But of course, everyone seeing this video will know him much better as one of the most prominent voices on YouTube throughout Russia's full-scale war, someone with absolute moral clarity about who is the aggressor and who is the victim, but also someone who could bring his direct military experience to a detailed analysis of the unfolding war. Before we jump in, thank you to everyone who has been supporting the channel, especially through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and all those who've been supporting our campaign to run at least 12 events this year. We're well on course for doing that. We very much hope that these events will have an impact in supporting Ukraine, but also have an impact on waking Europe up. This is going to be one of the topics we discussed today, but it is quite clear now that Ukraine is critical for Europe's survival. Europe is critical for Ukraine's survival in pushing back Russian aggression. So thank you to everyone who is supporting the events that we're doing, and these are very much designed to raise awareness of that as well as other issues. Jake, welcome back to the channel.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Let's dive straight into the so-called Easter ceasefire, and it never ceases to amaze me, the number of media outlets, even the BBC correspondent. When Putin came out and said, we're going to have a ceasefire, they said, it's a surprise, what a huge surprise. And then when he violates it, they say, oh, surprise. But for you and I who've been paying attention day in, day out to Russia's strategy and going back and look at their behavior in the long war that started from 2014, there's nothing surprising, surely, about Putin's announcement, and there's nothing surprising about him breaking it. Why is this, this real failure to analyze and to remember these patterns of behavior and even to think in any way strategically, not just on the part of the media, but many politicians as well?
Yeah, this Easter ceasefire was nonsense. Putin did this, I think, in Christmas of 2023. He unilaterally announced a 36-hour ceasefire, but nobody on the ground was actually adhering to it. It's just propaganda. And I do think it is effective. I think there's a lot of people who don't pay attention to the war day to day, and they get to read the headline, Putin offers Easter ceasefire or Christmas ceasefire. And then they think to themselves, well, that's very nice of him to do. At least somebody is trying to do something to make this war stop. So he's trying to get the free credits when in reality, nothing stopped. The war machine carried on as normal. And what kind of a reprieve is 36 hours anyways? Do you think the people of Ukraine, even if it were real, even if all Russian forces stopped firing for 36 hours, would anyone in Ukraine be grateful or appreciative? So I think there is this like historical romantic legacy because there have been these famous temporary ceasefires in major wars throughout history around holidays, but it's meaningless to Putin. He doesn't care. If anyone reading these headlines actually cares about Christian values, they should take note that the Russians have destroyed over 600 churches and holy sites across Ukraine in the last 3 years. They're systematically destroying Baptist, evangelical, pretty much any church that isn't the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church. Putin is doing this to control. He wants to control the pastors and the sermons and the language used by these preachers to control the people. So no, this was complete nonsense. But if you talk about the war day to day, you have to cover it. And no, I'm not giving Putin any credit for anything here.
Absolutely. I think the figure I saw is about 70 pastors have been killed, some of those showing signs of torture before death as well. So this really is a war on religion, isn't it? And we should probably dive into this a little bit because this topic actually cuts through. I don't know if you've ever spoken to Greg Terry, who's a good friend of mine, who's an American pastor with 30 years experience of running aid convoys and helping various missions in Ukraine. And he can attest personally, he knows many people personally who have been sort of tortured or their congregations suppressed. This is Russia's war against religion as well as freedom. But again, through PR, let's call it PR, really, it's a sort of propaganda and all the proxies, this doesn't really come across or nearly as strongly as it should.
In a dictatorship, nobody is allowed to be worshipped or praised more than the dictator. So every dictatorship in the world, they're very self-conscious about religion and especially Christianity. So Putin, wasn't it Stalin who said that religion is the opium of the masses? You know, in the 1950s and 60s, how many churches did Stalin destroy? And yet Putin can't build new statues and monuments to Stalin fast enough. But Putin feels confident with Patriarch Kirill and the clergy apparatus that he controls the church. It's an extension of him. People are allowed to be religious in Russia, and they're allowed to go to church on Sunday because Putin knows he has all those people in his back pocket. That's not freedom of religion. Those people, it's not the individual's fault. The average person trying to go to church on Sunday and be a good Christian in Russia, it's not their fault. But their religion has been hijacked. They're not getting true moral clarity from their sermons. They're just getting Kremlin propaganda.
I would say, I mean, I'd be even harsher. I'd say there's freedom of superstition in Russia. But if you want to actually exercise your conscience as a Christian and adhere to those values, then there's no space for that because you can't criticize the army. You cannot practice sort of pacifism in any capacity in Russia. Let's turn to something else because it made me, I know it's in a very unpleasant way, but it made me smile a little bit when you said that in a dictatorship, not only are you not allowed to sort of criticize the sort of big boss, but you have to have a certain level of obsequiousness. You have to praise their qualities. And that unfortunately reminded me of numerous occasions of seeing Trump. Who clearly requires the same kind of, obsequious what should I call it? Butt kissing, basically. And the phrase that's come out, and Rubio has said this as well, apparently, that they are ready to wash their hands of the war. This strikes me as not just strategically inept, because they've done very little to actually try to resolve the problem of the war, but it creates an extraordinary moral vacuum in geopolitics with this sentiment coming out of the US.
The United States has tremendous leverage over Ukraine, but also tremendous leverage over Russia as far as increasing sanctions or being tough on their shadow fleet tankers. There's a lot that Trump could be doing right now to apply pressure to Russia, to force them to the table, to get a real ceasefire. There are carrots and sticks. And since Trump took office on January 20th for Ukraine, it's only sticks. We're going to cut off intelligence sharing. We're going to cut off military aid unless you offer this unconditional 30-day ceasefire. And Ukraine did it. Trump shut off military aid. Zelensky didn't want to do it. But Zelensky said, okay, I will agree to this 30-day unconditional ceasefire to move on the path to peace. This was March 11th. This was 41 days ago. And the Russians have just been ignoring it, pretending like it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, Trump only hands out carrots to the Russians. Concession after concession after concession. Not even part of a negotiation. There are no negotiations. The United States meets with Ukraine to see what value they can extract from Ukraine. And the United States is meeting with Russia to figure out what value can they extract from Russia. But there is no peace talks. There are no negotiations happening. Ukraine and Russia are not trying to align to make this stop. So this, to put this in historical precedence here, the Paris Peace Accords that ended the Vietnam War, the negotiations for that started in 1968, and the Paris Peace Accords weren't signed until 1973. It took 5 years of difficult negotiations to end the Vietnam War. We can go ahead and criticize how the war ended, but that's not the point. Peace talks and negotiations to end war are never simple. They're never fast. They're never easy. And Donald Trump bragged. Donald Trump screamed from the rooftops, I can end this war in 24 hours. I know how. Vote for me. Trust me. I can do this in 24 hours. He then got into office and said he was being sarcastic. Why would you ever take anything Trump says literally? And then he had this brilliant idea of a grand peace summit, maybe in Riyadh, and Putin and Trump would meet face to face to announce a ceasefire or a peace deal prior to Easter. Aren't Trump and Putin the best Christians ever? They've come together, peace in our time. Go ahead and give Donald Trump his Nobel Peace Prize. That's what he was fantasizing about in January and February. And the Russians just kept telling Trump, no, no, we're not going to stop killing people. We want to take the whole country. We're going to take the Baltics next. You're not going to stop us. You like us. You want to be friends with us. We'll sign an aluminum deal with you. We will vote with you in the United Nations when you invade Canada, Greenland, and Panama. So I'm sure behind the scenes, the Russians are laughing their asses off. These clips on Russia Media Monitor, the last couple of weeks have been very bizarre in that they're trolling Trump. They're making fun of Trump. They're making fun of Trump's supporters. They just can't believe they pulled this off. They basically bought the White House, and they're getting everything they want from Trump. So am I shocked that Trump is saying he's going to walk away unless, like the phrasing, if one side makes this difficult, I'll just take a pass. That's what the leader of the free world said. That's what the most powerful man on earth said. If
And
one
which
side,
side? He's not
one
talking
side makes it
about
difficult,
Russia here, is he?
I'm just going to take a pass. Like, this isn't a spelling bee competition. Like, the largest land war in Europe is currently happening. The European Union is America's largest trading partner. We're just going to take a pass? I mean, it's nonsense. It's indefensible. It's shameful. As an American, I am mortified. And none of this is going to end well for Trump and MAGA because the Russians are never going to stop.
Absolutely. And that we'll come on to Witkoff in a minute as well, because he is one of the vectors of this manipulation. But in addition to, I mean, Trump isn't actually washing his hands, unfortunately. If he did that completely, then maybe that wouldn't be quite so bad. But he is interfering on the side of Russia. There is plenty of evidence in a variety of areas that he seems to be leaning on the scales in favor of Putin and Russia. One of those rumors is that he's been pressuring an unnamed NATO ally to stop helping Ukraine. Now, it's been pointed out, I think it was sort of Keir Giles or Ed Lucas or somebody pointed this out, that in itself is extraordinary and terrible. But if you look at it in a deep historical perspective, it's also even more extraordinary because the US has architected or helped to architect with its allies the system that's been in place for 80 years, despite the extraordinary power the US has had in that period, which no other country in history has ever had that power. It has used it in a relatively benign fashion. It has not leaned on allies and interfered directly in their democratic processes. Not at any time in this 80 years, despite what sort of Russian propaganda would have us believe and extreme left-of narratives, etc. The US has been an extraordinary partner, given the amount of power that it's had. What we are now seeing, however, is the US interfering in sovereign democracies. They're using the tool of trade wars, trade tariffs. They've told the UK that they need to reform their laws on hate speech if they're going to get a trade deal. Now, this is an incredible level of interference, which has no precedent in history. Do you think that essentially, we've seen Ukraine being sort of bullied and abused, but this is treatment which any NATO ally can now expect to receive?
Donald Trump and MAGA, they're not nationalists. They're not isolationists. They actually are globalists. They want global reach. These tech platforms belonging to Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, Bezos, whatever, these are global platforms. For the Mag 7, the Magnificent Seven, all of these companies eventually will be doing more business outside of the United States than in the United States. For these American companies to say we only want to live under American rules, they would then be ignoring the majority of their customers. So these large tech companies have global interests because they have customers all over the world. And this is what Elon Musk paid for. This is why he wanted to buy the presidency, so that he could set American foreign policy to benefit himself and the other tech oligarchs here in the United States. But it's also the dynamic of Trump trying to turn the United States into an autocracy. Trump is claiming he's never going to die and he's never going to leave office and he's going to be ruling America in this new golden age. But it's going to be terrible. And everyone in the administration actually knows the standard of living is going to go down, the quality of life is going to go down, the stock market is going to go down. They know this. So they're trying to distract people and hide the metrics. They're trying to get rid of any oversight. They're trying to get rid of anyone that collects data on anything. But they have to interfere in free societies and other democracies because a democracy that exists anywhere is a threat to autocracy. If you live in freedom, complete freedom in Germany or France or the UK or Canada, we now live in a global society where anyone can peek into your country and your culture and see how well you live. And for a dictatorship, that's a threat. This is why China has the Great Firewall. They don't want their citizens knowing and seeing the rights and freedoms that people around the world have. Same is true with the Russians. And this is what Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are doing here in the United States. If they want to consolidate power and turn America into a true autocracy, then the existence of Western liberal democracy anywhere is a threat to them. Because if Americans can see the rights and freedoms that people in France or whoever have. So they're never going to stop. The Russians are never going to stop. The Chinese are never going to stop. MAGA is never going to stop interfering in your democracy, Jonathan, until you have a shitty right-wing populist leader that gets rid of free press, gets rid of the right to protest, gets rid of true freedom of speech. And then this is what Elon Musk wants. Just some strong man in charge, comparable to Viktor Orban or Fico in Slovakia. Just a strong man. And then when you want to do business in that country, you only have to flatter, show respect, and pay off one guy, and then you can get whatever regulations or access or resources you want. Elon Musk has been very public about this, that the democratic process to a CEO or businessman is frustrating. Consumer protections is frustrating. Labor protections is frustrating. Environmental regulation is frustrating. Having to constantly give campaign contributions every 2 years to politicians to make sure that you still have their loyalty and votes in Congress. He hates this. What if we just got rid of all those and we had one guy in charge of the country, and then you just have to pay him off and show him respect and you get whatever you want? That's what these tech bros are actually trying to do right now.
And then, of course, you can primary out of existence anyone who goes against you. You don't have to bribe them all. You just have to, make sure they don't retain their position if they cease to be loyal. And one of these assets, as it were, although obviously he wasn't elected, is Steve Witkoff. And to sort of top out this topic about so-called, ceasefires, peace deals, etc., which I think you and I don't have really any belief that there's any efficacy in such a process because Vladimir Putin does not want peace, and we'll come to that in a minute. But it seems that Witkoff has been an extraordinary tool in the hands of Putin and his negotiators. If Trump does try to come up with some parameters for a so-called peace deal before he washes his hands, how bad do you think the criteria are going to be in this so-called proposed deal?
There's not going to be a deal. I mean, Russia is going to continue saying, they're going to continue engaging in talks because every time they engage in talks, Donald Trump gives them more concessions. So the incentive is there for Russia to keep these talks going as long as possible because they keep getting announced new benefits and concessions. It also just gives the Russians legitimacy by breaking their isolation. But Steve Witkoff has exposed himself. The man is a total idiot. I didn't know anything about the guy as soon as Trump named him as his special envoy to Russia. So I held back, I reserved myself, but then we saw him on the Tucker Carlson interview. And Steve Witkoff said that the true source of this conflict, this war, are these disputed 4 oblasts. And then he said, Crimea and Donbass. And then he blanked and he gave up. And Tucker Carlson had to jump in and say Donetsk and Luhansk. So he said the dispute was over these 4 oblasts, and he couldn't even name a single one. He didn't know the names of any of them. He said Crimea and Donbass. Then when Witkoff was in Paris, he was in that I forget the name, the Elise Palace or whatever.
Elysee Palace, yes.
Elysee Palace, and it's got that gold trim on all the doors and whatever. And he was looking at the French delegation, looking, and he was stunned. He was like, "Wow, this looks just like Mar-a-Lago. Did you guys copy Mar-a-Lago?" And it must have taken so much restraint for the French delegation not to laugh in his face. The guy was just so stupid about it. But this is why Trump has put him in charge of everything. This man has no experience in diplomacy. He has no experience in government. He knows nothing about Russia or Ukraine. He's never even been to Ukraine. But this is who Donald Trump trusts to be his conduit in these negotiations, these backroom deals. And, it was Michael McFowle who said, not even the best diplomat in the world, the best diplomat in history, could negotiate an end to this war if that was their primary focus in 100 days. Meanwhile, Trump has put Witkoff in charge of negotiations with the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Iranians, and the Russians, all at the same time. And this is what Trump does. Like in his first term, every time there was a hot button issue, Donald Trump would say, "I'm going to put Jared Kushner in charge of it." Jared Kushner was in charge of like 18 different task forces because Donald Trump didn't trust anyone else to do anything. So, yeah, I don't know who this Steve Witkoff is. He's Trump's golfing buddy from Mar-a-Lago, but Trump only trusts him to handle and deal with all of these foreign leaders. He doesn't trust Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State. He doesn't trust Mike Waltz,
Or
his
Kellogg.
national
Kellogg's
security
been
advisor.
sidelined, hasn't he, as well?
Kellogg is a prop. Honestly, Kellogg, I think, is only there for Trump to humiliate. Kellogg was Mike Pence's national security advisor in his first term, which I thought was very weird. Why would Trump bring back to his administration one of Mike Pence's guys when Trump hates Mike Pence? And now I get it. Like it took me a couple weeks to figure out what Trump did. But Kellogg is just a friendly face to waste the time of European leaders. Trump doesn't care about Kellogg. He's not going to listen to Kellogg. Anything Kellogg says or does is irrelevant. That's why Trump put him in that position, to humiliate him, to humiliate Mike Pence.
And
It's also
distract the
cynical.
media, distract everybody else from what's really going on.
Exactly. And I think on some level, Kellogg knows this now. And General Kellogg, he's a patriot. He's in his 80s. He's served his country honorable for a long time. I think the reason why he hasn't resigned or quit is because he's hoping, something politically will change and then Donald Trump will actually listen to his advice. But no, he's
And
a tool. He's a prop. Trump doesn't learn. He's never going to change.
and Kellogg's daughter has some very strong connections to Ukraine. So out of all of that crew, he has, the direct line to first-hand witness, evidence, as it were. So, if you're being a rational actor, you'd say, well, that guy actually has some connection on the ground. But as you say, it's a complete kind of distraction. Now, before all this sort of kicked off, back in December, I've actually been accused. I'm pretty sure they're Russian trolls, but I've been accused of being a sort of how can I say it, sort of supportive of Trump at some point, which of course is not the case. But I did a couple of episodes to say, well, here are the levers that Trump could pull. Here are the various levers, and if he was minded to end the war and put pressure on Russia, this is what he could do. Of course, he hasn't done a single one of them, except one, perhaps inadvertently, and that is crash the price of oil. Now, I'm sure he's not done this to put pressure on Putin, but I think there are some dire implications for the massively lower oil price for Russia's war economy. And you've done a couple of videos on this, which I think this is a topic which the audience really gauges in. But this is a disaster for Putin.
Yes, I also made this reference and comment several times. Like as soon as Donald Trump came into office, well, actually, as soon as he was elected, I said, even if Trump chooses not to support Ukraine in any way, he could still end up accidentally supporting Ukraine by crashing global markets. I've been waiting for a recession for 3 years. I don't want a recession. A recession is not a pleasant experience, and I don't want any of my fellow Americans to lose their jobs or lose their homes or lose their savings. But recessions are natural byproducts of capital markets. You know, on average, the United States goes through a recession every 7 years. So I knew it was inevitable. And I said, if there's an economic slowdown, it's going to hit the Russians the hardest. The Russians are dependent on raw commodity exports, and the rest of the world is only buying their exports if they're booming, if they're developing, if they're growing. And this is reflected in the price of oil. When the price of oil is high, that's because global demand for energy is high, and that's usually an indicator that economies are doing well. And if economies slow down, for example, during the COVID crash, the price of oil actually went negative. Oil companies had to pay people to take it away because they didn't have any more storage capacity. If you don't have anywhere to store your oil, you have to stop pumping. If you stop pumping, that can be an expensive process to cap the well and then retap it. So the price of oil is going down in response to Trump's it's not even a trade war. Like Trump wants to restructure and end like the global economy is integrated. We have supply chains that are insanely complicated, and it's all based on trade deals, many of which Donald Trump negotiated himself. But Trump is saying the United States doesn't want to actually trade with anyone. You know, if you make plastic toys and textiles or whatever in Vietnam or China, we want those jobs back. We want low wage manufacturing jobs back for some reason. Um, so these tariffs are stupid because they're not going to work. Like a 10% flat tariff across all of these countries, most of our largest trading partners, including the European Union and the UK and Ukraine, uh, these tariffs are not high enough to actually incentivize American companies to give up on their billions of dollars in, capital expenditures to build these factories and hire all these employees. Like 10% is not enough to actually re-onshore anything. And this 10% is just inflation. A tariff is a tax paid by Americans on imports. And we're already seeing it here in the United States. The price of groceries, the price of whatever you buy at Walmart has gone up. And it's going to continue as retaliatory tariffs come in. But I don't understand how people can view Donald Trump as a pro-business leader and not understand brand value, like the intangible value of your name and your reputation. And Donald Trump has completely destroyed America's brand value and reputation. I don't know who America's friends are right now. I don't know who our allies are. But those are the people you get good deals from. Those are the people you get closer to and you trade with. And apparently, America's friends are not Canada. They're not the UK. They're not the European Union. They're not Mexico. And these are our current largest trading partners. So we are going to have very tough times economically here in the United States until Donald Trump, JD Vance, and Elon Musk are removed from our government.
That's absolutely right. And the other inadvertent thing, perhaps, is you've got, I say, if you class the US as a sort of empire or has a global reach, but there are two major expansionist global empires, and that is China and Russia, both of which have various territorial ambitions that they're willing to, suffer economic consequences for potentially fulfilling their geopolitical ambitions. But it seems that by sort of supporting Trump to take office, at least Russia certainly has been pouring some sort of kerosene onto that fire. It sparked a trade war. It sparked tariffs, oil prices crashing. There is global recession, possibly even sort of depression in the offing. These are events that could destroy at least two out of those three global empires. I mean, China and Russia are particularly vulnerable to the chaos that's being unleashed.
What is that quote from Game of Thrones? Littlefinger, chaos is a ladder we all climb. What China and Russia want to do and are currently doing, it's just the natural state of an empire. It's what Nazi Germany did. It's what Imperial Japan did. It's what the Mongols did, the Persians did, the Romans did. When you consolidate power and you have an emperor or a dictator or a king, whatever, it's always the same story. They always look at their smaller neighbors surrounding them and they say, wouldn't it be great if I was in charge of those people? Wouldn't it be great if I had control of their resources and strategic location? It's all about getting big before somebody bigger than you comes along and does the exact same thing to you. Uh, there's this famous story from the Peloponnesian Wars called the Malian Dialogue. And I'll just tell it for you here on the podcast here. But this is, like 5th century BC. The Spartans and the Athenians are fighting. And there was this tiny island called Melania. And these people were trying to stay neutral. They were, cultural kin to the Spartans, but they weren't fighting with the Spartans. And the Athenians showed up at the island saying, you have to surrender and pay tribute to us. Otherwise, we're going to kill and enslave all of your people. And the Malians said, why are you doing this? We're neutral. We're no threat to you. We don't want any part of your war. And the Athenians told them, too bad. We have to take your people. We have to take your resources because we're at war with Sparta. We need to absorb you, get bigger so that we can defeat our true enemy. And the Malians resisted, and the Athenians overpowered them, and they killed and enslaved everybody on the island. And the quote is, the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. Might is right. Power dictates who gets what in this world. And the United States, after World War II, said we have to stop this. We have to break this cycle of empires because the weapons have become too powerful. As soon as we developed nuclear weapons, we said we can't do this age of empire stuff anymore. We have to break this. So the Bretton Woods Agreement was based on respecting international sovereignty. We created the United Nations. We have the inviolability of borders. We're not going to redraw the maps, and we're going to trade with each other. We're not going to have competing systems of empires with privateers robbing each other's ships all the time. We're going to have free trade, and the United States Navy is going to patrol the world's oceans to enforce it. And that is what has led to, laptop computers and VR sets and the internet. Like, technology, prosperity, wealth is all a consequence of the Bretton Woods Agreement based on free trade and ending the cycle of empires. But human nature, the human pattern of 10,000 years of empires rising, expanding, and collapsing, Xi wants to bring it back, Putin wants to bring it back, and Donald Trump wants to bring it back. And it's terrifying, specifically these three powers, because it's George Orwell's 1984. It's Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia, and the cycle of these big three occasionally allying with each other to check, but they know they can never overtake each other. It's just a continuous warfare, continuous propaganda, basically enslavement of the people. And this is the tech dystopia that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are trying to bring into the world because they think it would be better for them personally.
And of course, out of those three, the one possibly least likely to survive whatever further confrontations we're going to see over the next sort of year or two, I would say, is Russia, because it makes the least sense in imperial terms. It doesn't make anything. It digs stuff out of the ground. And if no one wants to buy that stuff, then really they've got very little to offer economically. It's a system.
Jonathan, let me jump in here, and we have to look at the starting stats of these three empires: the Russians, the Chinese, and now the Americans. And the reason why Russia has not collapsed the last 3 years is they're food independent and they're energy independent. They're a net exporter of food and a net exporter of energy. So how do you collapse an empire that is self-sustaining on food and energy? Those are the big igniters of collapse of an empire. Same is true with the United States. America is a net exporter of energy and a net exporter of food. So we're going to be very hard to beat, hard to kill. The Chinese are not. The Chinese are a net importer of energy and a net importer of food. So if global trade shuts off or breaks down, their cities go dark and their people go hungry. China has the most to lose from globalization breaking down, not Russia, not the United States. But I don't think Xi is getting good information anymore. Like, I think Xi has arrested and purged so many people to stay in power forever. That's what he wanted. That I don't think China gets good information. I don't think Trump gets good information. I don't think Putin gets good information. A common theme among autocracies is the guy in charge gets mad when he gets bad news. So people just don't give him bad news. They tell him what he wants to hear. And that's when people start dying. That's when things get very dangerous. And that's the world that we've woken up to in 2025.
And of course, Musk and Trump are dismantling the apparatus of US governance. Again, an extraordinary complex system that perhaps needed a little bit of sort of slimming down. But that's not what they're doing. They're taking a sledgehammer to it. So whatever good information was being provided by the structures of governance in the US, those are being dismantled. I suspect, as I observed Trump's first term in office, I don't think he listened to any of that good advice, despite the machine of government providing that advice. He knew best. Russia, however, is an interesting one because I agree with you. I mean, it will hold together, but it's also held together by fear. It's not really held together by a common story. It's not held together by values, really. This is all sort of for PR. It's held together by force and fear. It seems to me, though, that Putin is intent on pushing that system to the absolute limits because he will not relinquish this genocidal, illogical war against Ukraine. He will keep pushing and pushing and pushing until that machine, that is the Russian Empire, really starts to creak at the seams.
Russia is the Horde lands. It's the Mongols. The culture of a country is shaped by their geography, and Russia has some of the worst geography in the world. It's flats, it's arid, it's cold. All of the rivers run north to the Arctic Ocean, so they're not navigable. It's just expensive and difficult to get around Russia, move stuff through Russia, and it's indefensible. They don't have natural barriers like mountain ranges or lakes and rivers. So, for over 1,000 years, it's all about, once again, strategic depth, expanding in every direction to give your core territories protection in the event of a war. That has been the mindset of the Russians. So, yes, they do have the core territory, Moscow proper. You can add in St. Petersburg, but everything else is just a buffer zone and a resource colony. There really is two Russias. There's the Moscow ring and then everything outside the Moscow ring. And everyone in Russia knows that there's two Russias and this disparity. And concerning how does Russia transition, or is Russia going to stay together, or is Russia going to break up? If Russia falls apart, I think all of these new states, these new territories are going to start fighting with each other over the diamond mines, the gold mines, the oil fields, whatever. But you can't, there are no natural barriers. There are no logical places to start drawing lines. And Russia has eradicated the cultures of these people and, through Stalin and just moving people around, that was the point, to stop people from being able to consolidate and form their own nation states. The Caucasus, that's obvious and easy. They'll split up and they can form their own little tribes in the mountains. But for the rest of the territories, it's going to be a mess. And I don't see a scenario where Putin wins. So the only logical scenario is Russia loses. And if Russia loses, I think they're going to devolve. I do believe this is what Jake Sullivan and Joe Biden feared, the collapse of Russia, and then these territories all going to war with each other over the resources. In that dystopian scenario, all these new states would have nuclear weapons. Millions, if not tens of millions, will die in this dystopian future. I don't want that, but I don't think Putin has given us an alternative path. He's committed the elite of Moscow. He's telling them basically, help me win this war, help us get our empire back, or everyone is going to die, not just me.
I agree, and I've heard exactly that sentiment expressed by people who, understand some of the inner workings of the Foreign Office here in the UK. I think those twin nightmare scenarios of Russia fragmenting into sort of competing warlords, and also the sort of nuclear threat that emerges from it. Those are the two things that I think have propelled many countries not to give full-throated support to Ukraine for victory, and yeah, almost sort of hedge their bets, trying to make sure that Russia doesn't sort of collapse precipitously. I'm not sure Trump is capable of that sort of depth of thought, but certainly he's leaning towards helping Russia. And the other interesting video he made recently was about Putin preparing for the next war, because he's just conducted one of the largest conscription drafts in the last couple of decades in Russia, and that will expand the military to 2.4 million. So those that are being conscripted in this draft are not necessarily going to Ukraine, but certainly they will relieve soldiers throughout Russia who can go to Ukraine. And in parallel to that, we see an extraordinary militarization of education, the media, and society in Russia as well. So it seems that Putin is not just addicted to war, but his entire regime is now predicated on the idea of eternal warfare. That perhaps is not a realization that comes through strongly enough, I think, to many leaders in Europe and the US.
I think for Putin in the opening weeks and opening months of the war, he was very paranoid about being assassinated. He wasn't sure if the Russian people would buy into this vision he has for Russia of a resurgent empire based on continuous war. If Russia becomes a true empire, it's never going to stop expanding. It'll eventually go for the Caucasus. It's going to go for the Baltics. It'll go for Finland. It'll go for Poland. It'll go for Central Asia. It might do it a century from now. It might do it 150 years from now, but they can't help themselves. Whoever replaces Putin, if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, it's just going to be the same agenda. It's the agenda of every empire throughout human history. So Putin uh, has already told Trump what he wants to do, and Trump doesn't care. Trump's like, well, yeah, I mean, my sphere of influence is North and South America. You can have Europe, whatever you want to do. So the United States at the moment is trying to figure out how to get out of Eastern Europe, to withdraw their U.S. forces from the Baltics. Tragically, 4 U.S. service members died in this training accident in Lithuania 2 weeks ago. And Donald Trump refused to welcome the bodies home at Dover Air Force Base. He didn't want to meet with the family members. He pretended like it didn't happen. U.S. servicemen died in Lithuania, 4. And our commander in chief went golfing instead. He had a club tournament in which he somehow magically always wins his own club tournaments. And then he brags on social media about winning a gold trophy or whatever. None of this is going to make sense to people like you and me, Jonathan. But yes, we're in serious trouble. We're in serious danger, and we need to find a way to course correct to stop tens of millions from dying in future wars.
And that's in the last couple of minutes we got, I wanted to focus on, because again, people are saying about sort of, no one wants another country interfering in their democracy. And I'm always mindful that when I make criticisms of Trump and so on, I'm not an elected citizen of the US. I'm actually from the country that, US democracy was born by trying to break away from the country that I live in. But nonetheless, the health of American democracy affects the health of global democracy. There's no question about that. How concerning is it that someone like Timothy Schneider, Marcy Shaw, who are preeminent amongst the world's experts on understanding the mechanics of not just sort of autocratic control, but the transition to autocratic governments, they've left to take up positions in Canada, and it is certainly a precaution out of fear, maybe an overabundance of fear, but a fear of where the US is heading. Do you think they're justified? Do you share those fears of what we're going to be experiencing over the coming sort of months under the Trump regime?
Absolutely. Donald Trump is going to start disappearing journalists, disappearing political opposition leaders, disappearing business leaders who won't do what he wants. Everything that Putin has done the last 26 years in Russia. That's the playbook. That's the starting point. When Putin took power in 1999, he had an agenda to consolidate power, get rid of the regional governors that were elected independently, subvert the courts, turn the Duma into a rubber stamp. Trump is on the exact same playbook. And as soon as he thinks he can get away with it, yes, he is going to start killing people. He can't shut up about, like, he's so giddy this week about this concentration camp, this gulag in El Salvador. And he's saying he's going to start sending homegrowns next. Homegrowns is a U.S. citizen. So he wants to disappear U.S. citizens without any due process to a foreign gulag in El Salvador. That's where we are as America. So there's no other way to spin this. Anybody who's not speaking the truth to you right now about the danger we are all in, they're complicit in this regime to turn the United States into a thriving democracy, the wealthiest country in the world, into a corrupt, shitty autocracy with a comparable standard of living for the average person similar to Russia. And that's not what I want. That's not the America I want to live in. So I'm going to continue resisting. The good news, Jonathan, is they're all idiots. Like, Putin was a former KGB Soviet colonel who specialized in human intelligence. Putin was highly intelligent and capable. Now, he got the job because he was little and unimposing. And I think Boris Yeltsin, when he chose his successor, he was hoping that Putin wouldn't become what he became. Like Putin rose to power because he appeared non-threatening. And they were hoping he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't turn Russia into a pure dictatorship. But Donald Trump is not competent. Donald Trump is not good at human intelligence. Like, he has good political instincts and he knows how to fight with people and win the adoration of the masses. But as far as engineering the United States into a corrupt autocracy, he is completely clueless. He is messing this up. The steps that Putin slowly took over 3 years leading up to that famous meeting with Mikhail Khodorkovsky, in which he, imprisoned him, and he said to all the other oligarchs, "You got to give me 50% of everything you have." Donald Trump is trying to do this in 3 months. What Putin slowly did to consolidate power over 3 years, Donald Trump is just trying to ram through in 100 days because he has no patience. He has no tolerance for slowly achieving, aims and objectives. So this is blowing up in his face horribly. He is doing too many things to piss people off at the same time, and we're seeing it. I know, I posted the approval ratings for Trump on all my social media, and people are shocked that he's still at 45% approval, but he's dropping at 1% a week. Since he took office, his approval rating is dropping 1% a week, and that is the equivalent of 1.5 million voting Americans who a week ago were saying, I'm okay with Trump, and now they're saying this guy is a nightmare, he's a disaster. This is a snowball effect that is going to destroy his reputation, and I'm confident by this summer he's going to be at 30%. He's going to be at his lows of lows in his base. And as soon as you're unpopular, you're not going to be able to find military leaders and business leaders to be complicit in your crimes. This is what Donald Trump needed to become a true dictator. He needed business leaders, Zuckerberg, Bezos, Tim Cook, and he needed military commanders willing to break the law for him, willing to ignore courts for him to get through his consolidation of power process. He's screwing it up. He's not going to be able to pull it off. And as soon as he is the most unpopular president in U.S. history again, because he was in his first term, then I do think the House is going to flip to the Democrats, whether it's Republicans resigning or switching parties to caucus. It's a razor-thin majority in the House. And as soon as the House votes to impeach him again, because he's going to continue committing crimes, I do think we're going to get to 67 in the Senate. By next summer, so we've got another year of this, Trump will be below 30% approval, and we're going to get to that 2/3, and he's going to be removed from office. If JD becomes president or Speaker Johnson becomes president, we're going to figure that out later. But it's going to be a nightmare. The next 2 years at least of the United States is going to be an absolute nightmare.
And he can do an awful lot of damage in that process. And the other thing I want to say, of course, is that when Putin took over, yes, he said, it took him several years to do that, but it's not in a country that has a history of checks and balances. It's not where, the Duma was a functioning legislature, really. These are all brand new institutions with very, very shallow culture. I would say no culture, actually, of democracy whatsoever. The US is very, very different. A country founded on the principles of freedom and on rule of law and due process, with 250 years of not just sort of the written word of law, but an actual culture of observance. Trump cannot erase this, surely, in just the period that he's got in office. One, he will have numerous challenges from those checks and balances and both federal and sort of local state law. But also, you cannot erase it entirely because, when the next guy comes in, I would imagine a lot of this stuff will actually sort of bounce back, whatever has been damaged in the process. So we should not give up hope. I know you said that you're not giving up hope, that you remain optimistic. But it seems to me that there's a fighting chance for US democracy to emerge from this as strengthened as opposed to destroyed.
The only thing that has a lower approval rating than Donald Trump is the Democratic Party. And what's happening with US politics is, I believe, the two-party system, the national parties are the weakest they've ever been. This is how Donald Trump was able to take over the Republican Party and basically in 2016. Social media has changed the game. Prior to social media, if you wanted to secure the party nomination and get elected to Congress or the presidency, you needed the party structure. You needed the party apparatus to find voters, get campaign dollars. Like, just having an R or a D next to your name oftentimes won you the election. So the parties were very strong and they mattered. And Donald Trump completely destroyed the Republican Party. It had gotten so weak. And I don't think we think in these terms. And I certainly didn't in 2016. I did not care about social media and the impact social media had on our political discourse in 2016. I didn't understand it. But Donald Trump, in a way, is the first social media president. The fact that he's on his phone all day, every day, sending out these insane tweets. And to you and me, they look insane. All these capital letters, these stupid nicknames he has for everyone. But it's Trump. Like, it's authentic. It's him having this connection with millions of people, tens of millions of people through social media. And that's something that Barack Obama never did. Hillary Clinton never did. Even Joe Biden in office never did. When something goes out on Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton's official social media accounts, it's the intern. It's a safe, sterile message that won't go viral because the goal in politics since forever is to not be noticed, to not have people paying attention to you. That's how you get stuff done behind the scenes and in backroom deals, is you don't want the average common voter paying attention to you. And what Donald Trump has proven is people want to have a personal relationship with their president. And this is something that not a lot of people are comfortable with. And they don't, if you want to run for office, you don't want people to know all of your personal details. But I think we've crossed that river and we're never going back. Whoever wants to win an election and get into the House, get into the Senate, win the presidency, you need to start posting on social media, all your accounts daily. And it needs to be you, not an intern putting out a safe, neutral message, happy Easter, blah, blah, blah. They want you expressing yourself, being authentic, showing your true personality, and they want to vet you based on that. They want shorts, they want selfies, they want to know your personal details every day. I'm not saying that's a better system. I'm saying that's the system we have. So the National Democratic Party, in my opinion, doesn't exist anymore. Chuck Schumer is not the leader of the Democratic Party. Hakeem Jeffries is not the leader of the Democratic Party. Bernie Sanders, AOC, they're not the leaders of it's not Gavin Newsom. So we've got 4 years trial by fire to get new crops of Democrats. And I think there's going to be a lot of primaries in 2026 and a lot of primaries in 2028 to get rid of these octogenarians who have just been holding the seat for decades. It's going to happen. There's going to be a counter revolution within the Democratic Party to reshape it, and we're going to have a new class of people that understand social media and understand how to take the fight to what MAGA has been doing the last 10 years, really. We need representatives on the other side who are confident and comfortable going on a 2-hour podcast, who can express themselves and make coherent arguments and sound authentic to the average person. That's what Americans want. And I think that the ideals and the values that I fight for resonate with Americans. But I just don't think Democrats or liberals or progressives or whatever you want to call them have been effectively arguing them on social media.
And we've seen that revolution in the 60s with the the introduction of television or sort of mass television audiences. If you didn't play well on television, you could no longer become, the leader of a party. So we've already been through a revolution like this, and it transformed our politics. So again, hopefully sort of optimistic that those figures will arise, because they have to arise. We cannot cede this space to right-wing grifters and the sort of podcast ecosystem, which currently is a very mixed bag. Let's have the final word, and let's devote the final word to Ukraine. We've been talking a lot about sort of geopolitics and the state in the US. It seems that Ukraine is certainly not on the point of collapse. It seems that they are innovating techniques, they're innovating their military-industrial complex, they're innovating sort of the zoo of drones, and then applying that very effectively. So whereas terrible things are happening to Ukrainian civilians, and the loss of Ukrainian military personnel is something to absolutely, to feel terrible about, on balance, it would seem that Ukraine is in a relatively positive position, perhaps positive enough to say no to a terrible deal if it is put on the table by Trump and his minions.
For the rest of this year, Jonathan, people like you and I can confidently say that Russia today controls less of Ukraine than they did 3 years ago. Russia had their withdrawal from the Kyiv area, March or April of 2022. They then lost the Kharkiv region in September. They then lost the Kherson region in November. So for the rest of this year, I can say every day that Russia today controls less of Ukraine than they did 3 years ago. So all of their minor gains around Bakhmut or Avdiivka or wherever doesn't make up for the losses they took in Kharkiv, Kherson, and the Kyiv region the first year. So thankfully, the Russians are really bad at war. They're amazing at terrorism. They're amazing at launching drones and missiles against apartment buildings and hospitals. But they suck on the battlefield. And it's a meat grinder. And I have to believe at some point, a year from now or 2 years from now, if Ukraine just continues holding out, Russia is going to collapse in on itself. There's going to be some kind of triggering moment. We got there. We almost got there with Prigozhin's rebellion. If Prigozhin had just held out for another year or two and waited for his opportunity, something could have happened there. So this was, I think, the Kiel Institute. This is a German think tank. They said all American aid to Ukraine can be replaced if the EU spends an additional aid equivalent to 0.21% of their GDP. The wealth is there. The resources are there for Ukraine to defeat Russia. We just have to find the political will. And I have to believe, given the direction of the United States since Trump came in, that the Europeans are going to find the necessary political will to make sure that Russia does not succeed. We don't know when that's going to be. We don't know how long this fight is going to be. But if you care about the truth, if you care about democracy, you're not going to give up. And I'm never going to stop.
Absolutely. I think we are all in until a Ukrainian victory. And even then, the hard work continues to keep these resurgent empires out and to strengthen global democracy. Jake, I'm always hugely appreciative of you coming on and the work that you do. I know the communities as well. And of course, the extraordinary fundraising that you do for the vehicles, which, again, congratulations on another absolutely incredible effort there. And having seen on the ground, driven past some of those vehicles on motorways, see them there with the graphicking, it lifts the heart. And I know that Ukrainians also feel the same. They massively value what happens there and the impact that those make. For today, though, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jonathan.